Yes, I have 20 minutes, or now less. And so my obligation is to steer between the twin towers, if I could put it this way, of resembling a strangling chipmunk trying to get everything in 20 minutes, or making an elevator pitch for death. So I'll try to do neither. But there's only room for a couple of stories and an allegation or two. So I was lucky enough and burdened enough and privileged enough to work in the death trade for a period of time. And before they caught on to me, I saw a lot. And once they figured out that I wasn't a team guy, I didn't see much more. But in that time, I'm going to try to give you let's say, a distillate of what occurred to me. While I was there, the repertoire that seemed relentlessly relied upon was of the personal and idiosyncratic and psychodynamic persuasion. It's no surprise, it's North America and it's now. And psychology has become monotheism without God. That's how it struck me. There is a God, but not the old kind. We have a psyche instead, which apparently calls the shots and will be served, so to speak. So I found that the general trend, and certainly the entire therapeutic repertoire, was there at behest of that God, in service to that God, and singing the incantations that God knows so well. And it occurred to me involuntarily while I was there that there was something missing. Well, quite a few things, but one of the things I was thinking about ongoingly was culture. That culture seemed to be in the death trade what I would call the phantom limb syndrome of the death trade, which is to say that culture, when it appeared, it was resisted, it was reduced, it was demeaned and diminished, and ultimately sacrificed on the altar of self-expression, as if everyone's way of dying ultimately came from them, their own preferences and so on. One of the things that struck me early on was how relentlessly insistent people were on opting for the repertoire of how many ways they could die badly. And that was the go-to arrangement, as it happened. This is a dark allegation, I'll grant you. But on my watch, to the tune of 1,500 or so people who died in care, I would say 90-something% of these people died badly. By any sane understanding of what constitutes dying and what good dying could possibly look like, it was there basically by its absence. And it had remarkable consequence by virtue of how it haunted the arrangement. So now that I have your attention, perhaps I would like to first of all suggest to you that the repertoire for dying that most people on my watch, and I'd not like to generalize from what I saw to any other population or place or time. This is a little Canadian observation, as this is a Canadian wardrobe that you heard described. Late fall wardrobe for us, so it is fur-lined, of course, but... So the repertoire for dying that people resorted to on my watch routinely was not one that they came up with on their own. This is not to say they didn't believe that they did, or that their paid help didn't believe that as well. But I'm offering you an alternative take on it, which is stronger than an allegation. It's a plea for a recognition that the principal repertoire for dying is culturally determined, culturally derived, culturally endorsed, and culturally enforced. Yeah. This is where all the ideas come from, the notions, even the idea that dying is fundamentally an exercise of self-description, self-declaration. It's the ultimate in autobiography. Even this allegation is a culturally driven proposition and peculiar to North America in particular and to the West slightly more generally. So this would be enormously good news, that your dying and the repertoire you resort to is culturally derived if you lived your life in a culture that was death-informed and death-literate and death agile. It's too much to say death friendly, but at least death versed is what I'm talking about. So that it's a companion much more so than it is an adversary. If that were your roots and that's where you derived your cultural leanings from when your dying time comes on, you almost couldn't ask for more. Now, I don't know about you, but I can promise you that I neither lived nor worked in a place that bears any resemblance to that description. I came of age, and I came to my senses, and I lost them periodically, in a place and time that is so relentlessly, incontrovertibly, and in a maniacal way, rather proud of being death phobic. Death phobic in the extreme, and grief illiterate alongside it. And these two maladies were the way by which people came to their dying time. They were the river Styx, and they were the ferrymen both. So, a little dramatic reading, product placement time. This is a book. I wrote it. I don't always remember where everything is, but I have this written down. So this is a little clinical tale, come from the front line. Goes like this. I was accosted in a conference when I was advocating the idea that people ought to die well, should die well, in fact, have a moral, political, and spiritual obligation to die well. And people's right to die badly was vehemently defended in this conference. I'd like to say that to you again in case you missed it, for the madness that it actually is. That people's right to die badly was defended routinely, not always clearly, but fairly routinely. That was the order of the day. This little story comes from that. What gives you the right to define a good death for anyone else? This is a standard North American objection to virtually any wisdom at all. She demanded again, and I said, by the power vested in me by absolutely nobody at all, I will define a good death. I said, you could try too if you'd like. You probably do that every day at work, probably mostly by default. Almost all of us do. Well, that did nothing to slake her fury, and I understand why, because she was a snowflake advocate. And she was defending dying people, not against their death, but against anyone who would propose a good death for them, or who would ask them to die well, or oblige them to do so, which was my self-appointed task. And just as Alcoholics Anonymous, the mantra at least, leaves room in the name of inclusivity for God, whatever you conceive that to be, quote unquote, so palliative care advocates defend dying people vehemently against anyone, quote, putting their own beliefs on them, unquote. I want to say again, the context of this is not a free-floating, wisdom-informed variety of options available to dying people. The context here is a withered repertoire of a way of coming to dying, seeing to it that you never really do. Often with the most compassionate intent, people in the death trade abandon the dying to the vague, rarely discussed, unprecedented, self-directed project of conjuring a personalized dying for themselves and a personalized meaning for it. Because no one's allowed to do so for them, because everyone has their own way of dying, because dying in dominant culture in North America is snowflake dying. If everyone does have their own way of dying, each elaborately legitimate and inalienable, then what are those of us working in the death trade who are not medical practitioners doing, I wonder? Why would any of us be needed at all now? For the sake of not seeming to be the ideological monster this seems to make me out to be, I'm willing, without any evidence or experience, to allow that there might be, say, 100 ways or styles of dying. If that seems like too many, you could reduce it accordingly or increase it if the number seems too stingy. Though I don't have many decades in the trenches, I've worked there, I've taught there steadily with some thoroughness and circumspection, and I've yet to see anything like the full 100 ways of dying. with all the variety of people, with all the relentless advocacy of personal preference that so many bring to the project of dying, I should be able to see how personality trumps persistent sameness, excuse the expression. Now, I'm trying to find another verb for that, but anyway, you just have to stand for the moment. But a foreigner, you'd let me go with that, wouldn't you? Of how personal style trumps persistent sameness and how personal style survives the rolling diminishment of the way dying tends to go in a place that doesn't believe in dying at all. I would think that most of the 100 ways of dying would have been in evidence over the years and would have shown themselves to me by now. But in good faith, I tell you that I have not seen them. Several, yes, in a good year, but no more. I would tell you instead that there are easily 10,000 ways of not dying. And I have seen each of them many times over. The 10,000 ways of not dying, that is where the repertoire of personal style and snowflake uniqueness proliferates. We could say that almost everyone in a death-phobic culture who is dying, give or take, has his own way of not doing so. This is what I've seen every day on the job. That not dying is what gives most of us in the trade our work. And supporting that not dying program is what exhausts the compassion and the devotion that most bring to it. Next item. I'd propose to you that culture is not an inevitable consequence of enough people sitting in one place and not moving around. In fact, I'd go further and say that I would suggest to you that culture is not an inevitable consequence of anything, that I would like to reserve the word culture for an achieved thing, not an inevitable thing. And it seems to me one of the marks of a deeply achieved culture is its willingness to recognize the extraordinary dent and diminishment it inflicts upon the place it claims for its ancestral and its emotional and spiritual home. So let me say that differently and suggest to you that it is the mark of a cultured people to know the consequences that those people visit upon the place that they claim to be what they hold most dear. And if this could be true, it may be the mark of cultured people to be willing to stop growing in the name of being cultured people, for the sake of the place that they draw all their emotional and spirit sustenance from. In other words, you could say, it might be in the spirit and in the manner of endings and limits of all kind that they confer upon us the opportunity to exercise our culture muscle and to achieve something like a status that would render us worthy of being claimed as proper ancestors in the time to come. If that's the case, I would ask you to consider the real possibility that the war that's being currently waged on endings of all kinds, and dying in particular, and the extraordinary medtech arsenal that's brought to bear during that time period, might be the signal indicator that the current regime is so without culture and so maniacally addicted to competence and to mastery of all kinds, that growth is its mantra and endings are its adversary. I would draw your attention for a moment to the actual etymological meaning of the adjective to be awake. The A is not the negating prefix it so often is in the English language. It's from Old English, and it means of or pertaining to or participating in. And then the root word, of course, is wake, from which we know, two commonly used versions of it. One, the thing that is incited by the death of someone, if you're Italian and Irish, and the rest of us go to Italian and Irish wakes to learn how to do it, I suppose. There's that kind, and there's the other kind. As you proceed through water, and of course through life, there are a stream of consequences that fan out behind you, and to a certain degree in front of you as well. The condition of being awake, the word is whispering to us constantly, has nothing to do with coming to alertness, coming to awareness, or rising from slumber, be it spiritual or otherwise. The word awake means to be claimed by the fanning out of consequence, intended and otherwise, that ensues as a result of you proceeding, you and yours proceeding how you do. That's the condition of being awake. And as such, you could say, at least etymologically, that the soundtrack for awakeness in a troubled time is probably not hallelujah. It's probably a sob. Third item. Perhaps you did this morning. I certainly did. Waking up every day expecting to live. It's a strange allegation. And of course, I mean no harm by pointing it out. But if you let it filter through, your attuned self, you begin to realize fairly clearly that even though it's not a bad MO in the short term, in the long term, waking up every day expecting to live is demonstrably in error, sooner or later. See? But you could derive the wisdom and apply it now and not wait for the later iteration of fallacy and disregard, and imagine what it does to you to wake up every day expecting to live. It certainly allows you to get on with your day, get to the cornflakes, and to the 9 o'clock session about dying, which I appreciate. But I hereby absolve you of any obligation to wake up every day expecting to live after my session. So, of course, expecting to live, in North America at least, it seems to me, doesn't remain an expectation so very long. It morphs into a demand. And I would ask you to consider that the death trade, as I learned it and saw it, is there principally to deliver on the demand to live. It's beyond an expectation. It is an inalienable right. And if the endings of your life are coming to call, and you wake up every day demanding to live, you are likely to be in a circumstance of adversity, not companionship. And that is a culturally derived, deep-running error that means you no good. Second last thing, how am I doing? How many minutes I got? I got 1 minute? You're shitting me, 1 minute? Holy God, okay, all right then. Quickly to the story. Very quickly to the story. I'm teaching in a decommissioned church. If you've never had the pleasure, I strongly recommend you try it. Now, it's not easy to find a decommissioned church, but the amazing thing about this one was that it looked exactly the same. Oh, it had some of the gear was down, but otherwise the bones of the place were pretty much the same. So I assumed that you know where I ended up being stationed, in the decommissioned center of the universe, at the front. And I've made my normal case for the death phobia of the times and so on, and for this cultural literacy. The audience was full of people who looked like me, save one. There was one person whose skin set her aside, or everyone else's skin set her aside. And when the end of the day came, this person sat up there in the corner and wouldn't leave, waited till everyone who wanted to talk to me was gone. There was nobody in the room but two of us. That's when she came forward. And this is what she said. She was obviously from somewhere in the Indian subcontinent, I'm not sure where. Perhaps Hindu or perhaps Buddhist. And she said to me, do you know, I'm a palliative care nurse. I do all the intakes. I meet every new patient that comes into the ward. Mm-hmm. And we have an intake form. I said, I know you do. And it's a checkbox form. Of course it is. And until today, I did something that seemed so self-evident every time a patient came in, that I never thought about it after a few weeks on the job. This morning, you're making me think that I've been engaged in a gross form of malpractice. That's why she didn't want anyone over here, because in our line of work, malpractice is not a joke, and it's not an adjective. So I said, do you want to tell me what it is, or you just want to tell me that? And she said, no, I'm going to tell you the whole thing. She said, on the checkbox, there's a little issue called, a little checkbox item called cultural issues. And it being a checkbox and this being palliative care, there are only two choices. And you can probably guess what they were. One was yes, and the other was no. There wasn't even an NA, which I wouldn't have minded that as an option. But that's all there were. And this is what she said to me. Every time the patient and the family was white, she said, and I came to cultural issues, I automatically checked no. Which is to say, she's learned her job very well. That in a culture that believes that your dying is your dying, to do with as you see fit, to dispose with when and how and if you want. It is no surprise that an outsider to the dominant culture of North America would take their cues and their job security from that little observation and realize they are there to serve the God of the personal styling. Not the God of dying, the God of not dying if you don't want to. And you might assume that she's engaged in a degree of cultural insensitivity by that rendering, but I suggest to you that her job security rested on how sensitive she actually was. And she had learned the lesson well. Then when it comes to dying in the dominant culture of North America, culture, reasonably and properly so, is on the third tier of concern. So this afternoon, in the 90 minutes that's allotted to me, I'll see if I can expand that for you. But for the moment, just let me thank you for what feels to me to be a remarkable willingness to attend to something that seems both unlikely and perhaps unwelcome and distinctly unhelpful. I would simply assure you that none of those things are true because I stand before you as a practitioner of that kind of trouble. And as you can see, it has aged me, but it hasn't killed me yet. Thank you very much.